And as people are settling in, just like to formally welcome everyone to Chesapeake Gold's live event. I'm pleased to introduce today their president and CEO, Alan Pangbourne. He's going to take us through a presentation, brief, followed by a Q&A session. As a reminder, you can submit your questions in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen at any point during the presentation. The earlier you get your questions in, the more likely we are to get to them during today's event. As always, today's summit's being recorded and will be available on six.com as well as our YouTube page to watch afterwards. The recording will be sent to you in email as thanks for registering. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it to Alan to kick things off, and I'll see you again as we get towards the Q&A.
Thanks, Romeo, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. Today, I'd just like to walk through the presentation, and I will stop on a couple of specific slides and highlight the press release that we put out yesterday that shows that we've been able to solve the issue we had around the kinetics of the oxidation process, and so obviously we're quite confident now that we can get to the results that we're looking for to keep moving ahead with the project. So for those of you who don't know the project, I'll walk through it for you, and then we'll spend a fair bit of time on the press release from yesterday. So first of all, as always, cautionary notes. I will be making forward-looking statements. I just made one earlier about our confidence in being able to get the results we need. So Chesapeake Gold, we have a very large low-grade deposit in Mexico. This isn't the story, if you've heard of it before, of a massive build at 90,000 tons a day. We came in about 2.5 years ago, and we've been working towards using a different approach to the project where we start with a smaller starter project, much lower capital, and a very different technology where we look at using a sulfide heap leach approach to be able to release the value in the project and get the gold and silver. Capital to develop the project would only be about $360 million as compared to over $3.5 billion in the 2016 case. Still have a 30-year mine life because it is much smaller. Would start at about 150,000 ounces a year gold equivalent production, but still have a very significant NPV of 1.9 billion Canadian. So very interesting alternative. Very new approach, different approach that would unlock value at Metates and then allow us to expand and expand after that. So how big is big? It's one of the largest undeveloped gold and silver projects in the world. It's almost 1 billion tons of measured and indicated. When you throw in the inferred, you're just over that billion ton mark. 16.8 million ounces of gold in measured and indicated, and 423 million ounces of silver. You then add another 2 million ounces of gold and 59 million ounces of silver in the inferred category, which takes us up to almost 19 million ounces of gold and pretty close to 500 million ounces of silver. The initial project is targeting a higher grade core that's in the massive intrusive and the intrusive breccia. That's about a 1 gram equivalent, 200 million tons with 15,000 tons a day. Start a project. Once it's up and running, we can obviously expand and expand and expand into the larger resource that's behind it. And the key with the process, much lower capital, operating costs, and it gives us a much better economic return. So for those of you who've been following the story, when we started 2.5 years ago, we did 5 initial drill holes. They showed significant improvement in the grade in the intrusive breccia and the massive intrusive, about an 18% increase in grade. We went back and then did some infill drilling, which allowed us to put together an updated resource estimate that we put out early this year. And that shows a total now of a 15.8% increase in gold grade in the intrusive and intrusive breccia, That's obviously significant. It helps the economics for the project. The other key thing we've been doing over this whole time is the metallurgical test work. That was the focus of the press release that came out yesterday. If you've been following the story, we started off with a cider test where we were able to improve the recoveries to 60% gold and 50% silver, unoxidized material, which you can see in the picture on the right hand side at the bottom is a gray color. When we try and leach the gold and silver in that, we only get about 30% gold. So we were able to double the gold recovery, and silver was 15 to 20, so over double the silver recovery as it oxidizes and then leaches. There's a list there on the slide of all the various things we were trying to improve the metallurgy and the kinetics of the process. In our minds, it has always been an issue with speed, not an issue of if it works, and the press release gives a lot of information around that. Again, in yesterday's press release, and this is probably the key graph that was in the press release, when we did the cider column, we were able to oxidize and get those better gold and silver recoveries. When we did phase 2 testing, for those who've been following us, we got a bit of a rude surprise, and it was oxidizing slower. We didn't really understand why. All of that work that we've done over the last year, we've now got a pretty good idea of why it was slower. We've also found a set of conditions that are even faster than our very first test. And we're now seeing oxidation getting to 15, 17% in 16 days. It's still continuing up in a straight line. So we're expecting that oxidation to get up into the 30, 40% range within the 180-day target range, which was the design in the PEA. So once we switch those columns over to gold cyanide leaching, we hope to be able to get the results that we need to be able to support moving into PFS. This is really important. It's very, very encouraging to be able to see that accelerated oxidation rate, and it will allow us to get where we want to get. That's the key point behind the press release from yesterday. This next slide, I'll try and explain this simply. It is particles out of the oxidized columns. So when we've oxidized it all the way through, it's not the faster one, it's some of the other slower ones. But when we've oxidized them long enough, you can see very clearly in these slides, for instance, this piece here in figure 1A, the entire piece that would have been sulfide has been oxidized to hematite. We believe it was marcasite. Why? Marcasite is a form of pyrite. There are multiple different forms of pyrite. It would have looked like this, obviously at microscopic level, because this particle's only 300 microns, so 0.3 of a millimeter, whereas this is a hand specimen. I actually have another one that I use sometimes when I meet with investors. We believe that that is the remnants of what would have been a crystal of marcasite that is fully oxidized. If you've listened to any of my other videos, you'd have heard me talk about how the oxidation process goes down stress planes in a crystal. This picture here, again, this particle is probably about 0.3 of a millimeter from top to bottom and 0.15 millimeters wide. You can clearly see the gray in the middle. These are obviously cut and polished and then examined under a scanning electron microscope. you can clearly see how the gray areas in between, it's honeycombed into the pyrite crystal. And it's followed what appear to be the cleavage planes or the stress planes of that crystal. The little red dots are when you use an electron beam to be able to analyze what's at that particular point. And we've clearly seen that some of them, when it's in the gray material, is hematite, which is iron oxide. So it's the product of the pyrite oxidizing. When you're right in the middle of the shiny stuff, that's pyrite, and it is still iron sulfide. So you're seeing sulfides right next to oxides that has happened during the oxidation process. So that's one form that the pyrite is breaking down. The other form of oxidation is this. This is the more typical. It starts from the outside and it's a reducing skin. So it's move closer and closer to the center. When we ran the electron probe across it, we very clearly saw iron oxide on the surface, which was hematite. As we got to a transition zone, we could actually see different levels of iron and sulfur in the same, iron, oxygen, and sulfur in the same point. So at that point, it's a mixture of pyrite and iron oxides, and it's moving towards the iron oxide. And when you get to the middle of the crystal, it is still very clearly pyrite. The other interesting thing on this photo, the cracks that you can see on the outside, it usually swells as it oxidizes. So that's what formed the cracks. The other one that's interesting is you see very clearly how it's focused the oxidation going down that crack that continues through the crystal. So some of these cracks are caused by swelling, some of the cracks were in the crystal, and the oxidation is focused on that crack. So that's support for, is the process working? Yes, the process is working. It always has worked. We've always been able to get oxidation. The issue last year was how fast. The previous graph clearly shows that we can now do it faster, which all leads towards supporting a potential PFS next year. I won't go through this one. There's a detailed presentation you can read on the website at your pleasure. This is just why it will work when you compare it to the copper process. I worked on a copper project. I followed the development of sulfide leaching in the copper industry for 30 years. We did everything on the left-hand side, and we will do exactly the same things on the right-hand side. That's why we strongly believe that this is working and will work commercially. Simple flow sheet, crush it, standard crushing circuit done everywhere in the world. An agglomerating drum, so as we mix the reagents in correctly and then control the mixing. It then gets put onto an oxidation heap. So we oxidize it first, rinse it, move it onto a second heap. We then leach the gold and silver using cyanide as normal. Once we've got the gold and silver, we take that pregnant solution, put it through a standard Merrill-Crowe recovery plant, and then pull gold and silver bars. The only thing that's new in this flow sheet is this oxidation heap. That is identical to what we do in the copper industry. The only difference is the chemistry in the alkali. This is an overall layout. Those of you who follow the story will remember these curves from before. First pad is where we do the oxidation. Second large pad is the final resting place for the material, where we do the cyanide leach. As I mentioned previously, proof of concept, we got to 60% gold recovery, 50% silver, oxidized to about 30% in 128 days. This is the overall final pad, big enough for the entire 200 million tons of intrusive. If we end up treating the rest of the material, we'll find other areas to expand the pad further. Results from the PEA, and as over the last year, we've been building more and more information to support these results, and these will be then replicated into a PFS next year. As I mentioned, $360 million capital cost, 15,000 tonne a day, about 1 gram a tonne. We assume 70 to 75 gold and silver recovery. We got close with the CITA column at 60 and 50. Obviously, with the accelerated oxidation rate, we now believe we can get higher oxidations, and therefore we'll be able to get to those recoveries. 31-year mine life, 147,000 ounces a year production for the first 15 years. Cash costs of about $680 an ounce, all in sustaining at 750. Gives me a very attractive NPV and IRR at 35%. Sensitivities, pick your price. Gold's currently sitting at around 1900, silver's sitting around 22. So the NPV would be sitting at that about 1.9 US dollars, Canadian dollars. And then the same for your IRR. The IRR would be higher than that 35%. It would be sitting somewhere in here at 42 or so. The other thing that's important with this process, it's actually environmentally better. Why? It uses less water. It uses about 90% less water, 90% less power, and there is no tailings dam. There was no tailings dam on that layout you just saw. How can we claim this? If you compare it, I used Barrick Gold's 2019 sustainability report. Why Barrick Gold? I know that they have projects that are 100% autoclave, and they have projects that are 100% heap leach. The alternative process for a refractory gold ore is an autoclave process. When you compare those two processes, Pueblo Viejo is in the Dominican Republic. All of their production comes from autoclaves. Valadero is in Argentina. All of their production comes from a heap leach. Their power consumption is 90% less in a heap leach. Their water consumption is 90+% less in a heap leach. And there's physically no tailings dam. The last couple of slides, we are significantly undervalued. We trade at around $2 per ounce, and our development peers move anywhere up to an average of about $40 an ounce. So significant upside as far as re-rating as we continue to de-risk the project. If you look on it, gold equivalent ounces per common share, we've got one of the highest gold ounces per share in the development market compared to many of our other peers. So finally, just to wrap it up, and then we'll go through questions. Very large resource. I think I've said that enough times. High grade core has been confirmed in 2022. We've now found a faster oxidation rate that we'll use going forward that will allow us to get to higher oxidations quicker. That will reduce working capital and capital costs. The process is innovative, and it gives us a lower environmental footprint, dramatically reduces capital. The PEA clearly demonstrated, once we can support all the numbers that are in there, that there is a very easily financeable, deliverable, expandable project. Phase one of the project, which was the focus of the PEA, has very robust economics, and at the higher gold price is more so. Durango in Mexico is one of the better states to be in. The local government, I've met with them multiple times over the last year and a half or so. They've been very supportive. They've been helping us with anything that we need help with. Well funded. We've still got $24 million Canadian in the treasury. We burn about $5 to $6 million a year at the moment. Shareholders, Eric Sprott is our largest shareholder with about 13%. Sun Valley's a bit lower at about 10%. I personally own about 11.5%. When you put Eric, Sun Valley, and the management together, we own about 40% of the company. So very tight shareholding. It's very comfortable. It means that if we want to do something, we can. If we want to stop somebody taking us out on the cheap, we can probably stop it. And we're trading at a very compelling valuation at more than a 90% discount to our development peers on an EV per ounce basis. That overall is the presentation, Romeo. So now if there's a bunch of questions, I'll do my best to try and answer them.
Thanks very much, Alan. And as a reminder to people in the room, you can enter your questions in the chat panel. We'll be happy to answer them live. But first, we had some questions come in advance over email. So I'll run through those first. First one is Tony F. wrote in, why are those columns black in the picture in the press release? Is the oxidization not working?
No, it's not that it's not working. We're testing other samples.
Perfect. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Michael L. asks, it states in the PR that phase 3 columns have achieved an oxidation level of 15% to 16% in just 60 days. Is that a fast enough process for strategic investors to be interested? And are there any implications that must be considered when you try and do this at larger scale?
Getting the kinetics up is economically advantageous. Because the kinetics determine the size of the oxidation pad. So obviously the faster we can do it, the smaller that pad is. The smaller that pad is, the sooner you get to cash flow, and also the lower the capital to build the oxidation pad. As far as strategics, I think as we continue to de-risk it and as we continue to put more information into the public domain, I think a couple of the metallurgists I know will have a very close look at the mineralogy that we've put out, because they'll understand what it means. And so you know, could that generate interest from the strategics? Yeah, it could. I mean, I know many of them, and I know people in many of them. It's a de-risking thing. So bit by bit, could a strategic come knocking? Sure, they could. Yeah. Would we be interested? Depends what it's worth. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Rodney writes in, says the PR says the company's actively seeking other sulfide gold deposits where the leach technology can be applied to potentially unlock significant economic value. He wants you to touch on those other projects. What do you have in mind?
Look, I've always said, and I strongly believe that this technology, one, is working. Two, we're getting more and more information to support that fact. But it will change how we approach sulfide refractory gold and silver ore bodies. Obviously can't say who's interested and who I'm talking to and who I'm doing what for. But you know, there are plenty of other deposits dotted up and down, certainly the Americas, certainly over towards Greece and Turkey in that area, and up through Serbia and Croatia. And then there's also some down in Australia that are known sulfide refractories. If you can do it as a heap leach, there is a very, very strong business case for smaller oxides that have a large sulfide underneath, right? And you can go search them for them. I'm not going to tell you who they are. I know who they are. I know where they are. And so as we get more and more information, and as we get more and more confident, and these results certainly help that confidence level, there's obviously a business opportunity where we can look at their deposits and offer something that nobody else can offer. which is a way to unlock that sulfide part of the ore body at significantly lower capital costs. In fact, if you've got an oxide project that is currently up and running and you're running out of oxides and you know you've got sulfides in underneath, you've got everything except the process and the oxidation pad. You've got everything you need. You've got the mining equipment, you've got the process plant, you've got the gold recovery plant, you've already got a heap leach. All you've got to do is oxidize the sulfides before you put it on the heap leach. And you've got to know how to do it. And we know how to do it.
Great, thank you. There's one question that came in on email, but this also bleeds into the first question that came in live from Kendall during the presentation. Really looking for insight, guidance, or any more information on the CEO search.
Don't really know at the moment. The board is looking at doing a search and deciding on who they're going to use, and then obviously looking for candidates. I may or may not be involved in that part of the search. I've obviously made recommendations to the board on, look at these types of search companies and whatever. It's really up to the board.
I appreciate you answering as much as you can. Kendall also asks, what's the cost of MET testing on a monthly or quarterly basis? And as a follow-up, is this expected to increase, decrease, or stay the same?
As you'd have seen in the picture that was in the press release, we've got some 40-odd columns running at the moment. We've got no real incentive to do many more because I need to get results before I load the next ones. But that's costing us about $100K a month or something. It's not that expensive. And one of as a bit of a follow-up, often people ask, well, what about other major expenses? The resource is there. In fact, when it was a pressure oxidation project, it was reserves. So the drilling level to support it is already done. So there isn't a large infill drilling program expected. We drilled to get material that we knew was fresh, we knew where it came from, we knew how it's been stored going forward with the test work. That was the only drilling we did. We did some more when we got a nice surprise with the grade increase to be able to update the resource and look at why it was so much higher grade, which we've now done. So we don't expect to have to do a lot more drilling. The MET test work is not expensive. The PFS, most PFSs cost you somewhere around the $1 million mark. If you've got all the information beforehand, you've spent a bunch of that money, and that's what we've been doing this year in the background. Besides the test work, we've recommenced environmental monitoring. We've got all the topo done. We know where the water's coming from. We know where the power's coming from. We got all the information about the power line that comes almost right to site. And when I say almost, it's like less than 2 Ks away. So we've been accumulating all of that other information to be able to convert the PEA to a PFS. My pending piece of information is the test work.
Great. Jam72 asks, when will we see a new recovery percentage of gold and silver?
After I've oxidized them far enough and then run the cyanide leach on them. I've got to be able to get into that 35-40% range before I want to switch them over to cyanide. And those faster columns are obviously going to get me there sooner. So that's certainly the expectation. And if you look at that line, I'd have to actually go back and look at which graph. The current line is out at 65 odd days or so. And so, I want to run it out towards the 180 days because that's what the pad was designed for in the PEA. And then switch it over to cyanide leach. So it's 3 months to there, and then it's another couple of months on the gold leach. So it's still another 4 or 5 months away at least.
Appreciate that. One question from Alan EN, not AN. How protected are you from others copying the technology?
It's patent pending. So that gives me some protection. There's 2.5 years plus of IP that's ours. There's all of the understanding behind how the copper system works, which most gold metallurgists can't even spell copper. So there's plenty of barriers. The other thing that's the IP piece is clearly, if you go read the patent, if you can find it, it doesn't tell you why I was at 5% oxidation on the phase 2 columns, I was at 10% oxidation on the cider column, and why now I'm at 15% oxidation all in the same time frame, 60 days. It doesn't tell you that. It doesn't tell you the range. It doesn't tell you above this, below that, this temperature, that crush size. Yeah, if as I was going through the slides, we've crushed anywhere from 3 millimeters from HPGRs all the way out as high as 1/2 inch. We've used different reagent strengths. We've used different pHs. We've tested on and off irrigation. We've applied other oxidants. We've messed around with the air injection rates. None of that is spelt out in the patent application. It just says in this big box. It doesn't tell you what the impacts are of each one. So if you've got 2 to 3 years to do all the test work that we've had to do, you can try and copy it, but then you've also got to find something that's outside the patent. So good luck, have fun. I've enjoyed it so far, but that's what protects us. It's the IP and the volume of information that we've got behind it. Can you do it quicker? Yeah, of course you can. You can put 150 columns up and do it all in parallel. Yeah. But what you also don't know is which ones didn't work. Right? There's 2 sides to this. Right? You've got the one in the graph where it went like lightning. You've also got phase 2 that was flat as a pancake. You don't know why. I do. We do. That's how you protect it.
No, fair enough. I got two questions here, I think on a similar issue, but you can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, from Marty and Jam72, looking for an update on the concessions issue / lawsuit.
Look, it's in the legal system. There's not a lot I can update at the moment because there's been nothing to update. We submitted our claim or our reclamo. I can't remember. Anyway, we submitted all of our stuff to start the process. The process has started. It's been assigned to a judge. I assume that the DGM and Sermonat and whoever else from the government is answering their side of it. And until, as they say, the fat lady sings, there's not really much I can say. It's in the process.
Oh, fair enough. And that looks like all the questions that we've got today. So thank you, Alan, for taking us through the presentation and the Q&A. I'd like to thank everybody who participated and submitted questions. If you're like me and you think of the perfect question that you want an answer to as soon as the event ends, you can respond to any of the email invites or send us your contact details, and the Chesapeake team will be happy to follow up with you directly. And you can always find more information on their website at chesapeakegold.com. But I'll hand it back to Alan for the final word and what's up next at Chesapeake.
So, Romeo, everybody who's listening, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us today. The press release that went out yesterday is really encouraging. It is really important. It is part of the answer to get us to that PFS. As I said, we expect to be able to get to that in early next year. And you know, as Romeo said, if you've got any questions, if you'd like to have a one-on-one chat, please ask. More than happy to sit down with you. If you're at Beaver Creek, we'll be at Beaver Creek next week. That's Tuesday through Friday. Again, more than happy to have a meeting with you, catch up, have a beer, and discuss whatever you'd like to discuss about what I believe is a great project and has a technology that will change this industry.